Okay, I'm recording.
I'm also.
Oh, I lost you. What just happened?
Oh no,
Oh no, you just
you
kind
can't
of
hear me.
yeah, you just kind of fell out for a second, but it's fine. Hi,
Oh,
Alan.
great. That sounds good. Hi, Aaron.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing swell. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. We're doing great. Uh
Yeah,
we were just talking
I feel that.
offline, recovering from COVID. Woo.
Oh no.
Yeah, that summer surge got me. But
Yeah, but
I'm
you're
okay.
on the other end. It sounds like almost to the end.
Yeah, I'm mostly fine. It's okay. It could have been a lot worse than it was. It just wasn't fun for like a week and a half.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I was doing a couple of short plays for a festival at the
Ooh.
community theater I started doing stuff with, and yeah, it was 2 weeks of nonstop tech rehearsals and performances in the evenings for the weekends. And yeah, now we're on the other side. It went really well. One of the plays was going to be chosen to go represent the community theater at like the state level, which was really
Ooh.
exciting. And there was judges that came throughout the run apparently, and the show I was in for the second weekend won overall best
Ooh.
outstanding production. Yeah,
You
which is
fancy
super
bitch.
exciting. I know. We also won the audience vote for weekend two, which was exciting.
Nice.
And the other play that I'd done for the first weekend got runner up. So I
Wow.
was in the top scoring plays as adjudicated by whoever the adjudicators were.
You are a
So that
winner.
was exciting.
Woo. That's awesome.
Definitely. Yeah, I was living my best life. Yesterday was not yesterday, Sunday. Sunday was a great day.
Yeah, that sounds like it was really, really fun. I love that for you.
Yeah.
I've learned more songs on the ukulele, which has been
Oh,
really
that's
fun.
exciting. Any
I,
more originals?
we haven't told the podcast about my original. It's a super secret.
Surprise.
No, just kidding. No more originals, but I have. So obviously, dear listeners, I have written an original song. It's called Neighbors, and it's about being mad at people who, when you try to talk about politics, they just tell you what books to read. That made me really mad. We can get into that another
Yep.
time in depth. But yes, that's what that song is about. And I've learned how to play Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is the classic ukulele
Oh, a
number.
classic.
Yeah, I learned
Yeah,
how to play Alpha Rat's Nest by the Mountain Goats, which is not a classic
of
ukulele song.
course. Of course. I think
Yeah.
ukulele, I immediately think of the mountain goats.
Yeah. Well, I saw them in a concert and they were really, really good. So I was like, I know what I'll
I
do.
love that.
I'll learn how to play their
Aw.
songs on the ukulele. Uh anyway, as much fun as I'm having catching up with you, we have a very lengthy episode to get into,
Mm.
and I think we should jump right into it with a very quick Ko-fi shout out because we've had a number of people donate to
Oh,
us since our
yes.
last episode, which it's been a while since we posted, but that's okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So thank you to our Ko-fi supporters, ever stalwart Dion, Leo, Allie, and Charlotte, who are all friends of the pod, recurring donors, and a one-time donation from our new friend Emily Ann. So that was really nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have I'm so excited about this episode. So we have a fun episode planned for you. Alan, can you lead us in a little bit with what we're doing today?
Yeah, we thought we were gonna shake things up a little bit, you know? I think we have proven that we love to change the genre, do a switch up, and kind of keep you all on your toes. So we thought we'd review a book this week.
Indeed. And it's a book that the author has described as a love letter to fandom, so it felt like the right one to give a try for. The book is called Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. You can find it at your local bookstore or online. It's not on AO3, sorry. But it's
Yep.
published by Tor Nightfire, and it is a horror book. And I have the description because I came prepared.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. So I'm going to read it. The summary of this book is Misha knows that chasing success in Hollywood can be hell. But finally, after years of trying to make it, his big moment is here, an Oscar nomination. And the executives at the studio for his long-running streaming series know just the thing to kick his career to the next level. Kill off the gay characters, quote, for the algorithm, in the upcoming season finale. Misha refuses, but he soon realizes that he's just put a target on his back. And what's worse, monsters from his horror movie days are stalking him and his friends through the hills above Los Angeles. Haunted by his past, Misha must risk his entire future before the horrors from the silver screen find a way to bury him for good. And you know what? We decided that we were going to live our dreams a little bit. And this is not normal for us. This is not a typical decision that we would make. But we reached out to the author of this particular book, Mr. Chuck Tingle, and he said yes to to joining us. So let us welcome Mr. Chuck Tingle to the podcast.
Hello! Woo. Glad to be here. What a dang treat.
I'm so excited, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to join us on our little podcast. It is truly
of course.
A joy and a pleasure. I'm very, very happy you're here.
I am honored to be here. I am honored to be sharing this moment together. Timelines crashing together in unexpected ways. You never know where you're going to end up. And I just got back from my book tour where I talked a lot about how we don't spend very much time actually thinking about just the incredible cosmic rarity of moments and how we arrived at different places, not just in our own choices, but then planets crashing together since the beginning of time. So I will enter this interview with that in mind and some appreciation and gratitude for this moment we share. So thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for being here with us. Love is real.
Yes.
I'm here. I'm a little flustered. I'm honestly really, really excited about this interview. We do have a whole bunch of questions to talk to you about your new book that you just came back from touring with. And of course, because we are a fan fiction podcast, a lot of them have to do with fandom, fan fiction, and then we're also queer. So we have a lot of questions about queerness and all sorts of fun stuff to talk about. Alan, would you like to kick us off with our first question for Mr. Tingle?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to start off with a bit of a soft one. So, what have been your experiences with fandom, both as an author, who makes things, and as a fan who is just more, observing of those things? Do you experience fandom any differently as a professional creator of these
question.
things?
That's kind of interesting because I know that you are a fandom podcast. So maybe you can help me out with this because when I think about it, and I guess, I'm assuming I am a slightly older buckaroo than you all, but I feel like when I was young, trotting up, just the idea of fandom, is what someone who appreciates creation and art and culture and pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, well, who is not interested in fandom? I guess I've met one or two buckaroos like that, but it is very confusing. It is part of existence to have a relationship with art. And I think it's funny that something like fandom has kind of been marginalized in a way to say like, oh, this is a silly way to interact with the world, when in previous generations, going back, whether it's decades or hundreds of years, we have also kind of defined like the purpose of life to be art. Once you have shelter and food, what are you actually living for once you start to live? And that is art. So it is mind-blowing to me that someone could be anti-fandom or not in some kind of fandom. It's like when you ask someone, oh, what's your favorite song or movie or book? And they say, I don't really do any of those things. I can't fathom that life.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I love that Alan teed this up with, it's a softball question. And then we're talking about, what is the philosophy of all living things?
Yes.
Incredible.
Well, that's what you get when you ask old Chuck on your pod.
I'm thrilled by this.
100%.
I think for me, when I talk about fandom, I'm totally fine with sharing that I am 31 years old. And so I have experienced fandom primarily as a digital space. Obviously, some of that has changed as we've gone to more conventions and spent more time in person with other fans of things. I haven't really met other people that I would call fandom friends in real life until I was an adult. But I think for
Wow,
me,
interesting. Yes.
yeah, I think for me, fandom is really a community of people who share a love for a thing, be it, an artwork, any kind of media thing, TV show. So I think of it always in relation to other people, which is why I think the dichotomy of experiencing fan as person who is consuming the thing versus person who creates the thing can be an interesting thing to sort of parse out and pick at.
Oh yes, interesting. Well, I will say, there is a lot of mystery around my identity, but I am okay to say that two things. One, I am actually much younger than a lot of buckaroos tend to think, but also unlike yourself, I did experience what we are calling fandom pre-internet.
Mm.
So, there is a difference there. I remember when you're really into a dang show, there were like episode guides and books about it.
Mm.
Was really where you were going to get the compendium of information about it. So not that far off, but I do understand, and I would say that as a creator, you're never going to avoid the relationship with fandom because, like I said, it is art. I think it's kind of silly when you hear these stories of creators who don't like fan fiction or different things like that. It's all a big loop. I am both a creator and a consumer of art, but I will also say that what gives me joy is the creation. I would much rather, I mean, take it with anything, whether you're saying paint a picture, write a song. I'm just going to throw it up there. I'm going to say a roller coaster ride just for kicks. I would much rather design a roller coaster ride and get joy out of seeing buckaroos ride it than I would go on one. And I think you can apply that to any kind of creation. That's just kind of where I'm at. But I also do both.
I love the idea of a roller coaster as fandom. That's incredible. So our next question was actually going to be about sort of your thoughts on fan fiction, but I think you sort of touched on it a little bit. How do you feel about fan fiction? Have you experienced fanfic of your work at all? Like, is it something that you think is like, I think of fan fiction as a transformative work, and therefore sort of we take it very seriously for folks who for something that often is sort of maligned as you were talking about earlier, something not particularly worth talking about. We take it very seriously. So I'm always interested in authors' perspectives on fan fiction.
I actually think I would go beyond transformative. I think for some, I think saying that I can meet anyone there
Mm-hmm.
and say I get it. I would take it a step further and say that it is not necessarily transforming the art. I think it is part of the art. I think it's the original piece. There is no distinction for me. So if someone, let's say Star Trek, is loves Star Trek and they write a Spock Kirk erotic fan fiction, I do not see that as transforming the art that is Star Trek. I see that as the art that is Star Trek. I think they are kind of a whole entire thing. I think that the issue here is that a lot of buckaroos tend to think of the art as what's on the page,
Mm.
and that the limit is, within the book or within the TV show, there is only X amount of episodes. For me, I don't think that's where the art is. I think it is in the interaction with the audience. It's with how you're feeling the day you watch it. Pretty much everything I think is, we define them by medium, but really the only medium that we're ever dealing with is a multimedia experience that is called life. So I see fan fiction as a legitimate and valid part of the art itself. I don't even think it's transforming it. I just think it's part of it. It's like saying if you added something to a painting that you're painting. It's just that is the painting.
That's so much to chew on right off the top. I love that.
Yeah, seriously, your perspective on everything is so like incredible. There's such a like welcoming, you have so much grace and openness for what art is and like all of the different ways that fandom or other things can play into being art on its own. It's really, really wonderful to listen to.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad we agree. I could have come in here and fired off some shots. But no, it is interesting. I think that my take on this is rather extreme in the sense that not a lot of buckaroos I've heard really share how extreme I am with this, or they just don't talk about it. And I think I can see how it would bother some on the other side, particularly creators who don't like fan fiction. There's many notorious cases of creators coming out against that. And I guess I can only say to them, I am sorry. I disagree about the nature of creation itself. I do not think that I know my books any or have the validity of my relationship to my books is no better than the validity of a reader. I once it's out and the rest of the world is experience it, the rest of the timeline is experience it. It is our art together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Sorry, and I think I cut you off.
Oh, nope. I'm sitting here sort of reveling in the joy of hearing all of these things because I think it resonates so strongly. And one of the things that I'm particularly struck by is that I think when we first started creating this podcast, Alan and I talked about this a lot. We felt an immense amount of shame as fanfic readers, and it was something that was very hidden. You didn't talk about it. And to your point, Chuck, I think there were folks who were really against it, and it felt like something that needed to be hidden away. So to hear somebody who does create things see fans not only as, part of the universe of creation is really validating, and it's really special, I think.
Oh, well, good. Yes, you are right in the sense that it wasn't looked at in a kind way for a long time. I think there's a lot of gatekeeping there.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of creators who, I have empathy for it because you fight to be a published author, a signed band, a represented actor. These are very hard things to do. They are lotto tickets, essentially. The chances of actually being successful as an artist are near zero. It's very, very difficult. And so I can understand the perspective of wanting to protect that. But I think the problem is that a lot of the time, creators who are so anti-fan fiction or fandom are misinterpreting kind of like legal issues with art issues and validity issues. Like I still believe that if I write a book as a creator, I should still own the rights to that book. When I say that the art belongs to everyone, that's not what I mean. I still think creators should be paid for their art. And I think most buckaroos do. But outside of that, I feel like some folks think that they can't acknowledge that and also acknowledge that it's all one big collaborative piece of art together, and that fandom itself is the blood pumping through the veins of the heart of that business that will eventually pay for you to survive. And the idea that we're somehow above that as a creator and that we can extract ourselves from that relationship is ridiculous. It's like saying, oh, the brain is the best organ in the body, so I'm going to cut my head off. It doesn't make sense to disconnect that. You're only harming yourself.
Absolutely. I feel like the nuance between navigating the capitalism of it all and understanding the legal issues while getting to the sincerity and the truth of the art and having sort of navigating those things is so complex, and I really appreciate your insight into it.
I will say, to talk about navigating the difference, there is I think part of the mistake too is there's a fundamental difference between what is moral and what is legal that I think is obvious to many, but when you're younger or maybe more conservative, it's hard to kind of see that. I do, as I said, like intellectual property. I do believe in that. But just because I would say it is legal for a company to say, oh, you can't make this product that we own, that doesn't mean that they should.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that it is, every situation of that is morally right or wrong. There is so much kind of nuance to that. And just because we have these kind of legal systems in place doesn't mean that they should be used, is essentially my feeling on it, and I will also say parody is legal.
Mhm.
I'm mostly just talking about things that would fall outside of parody even.
Right.
It completely depends on these situations, and it's not a blanket statement. And I feel like for some reason there's a lot of creators that think that if they allow themselves to say, hey, make all the fan fiction that you want, I appreciate it, I love it, and not only that, it is an important part of the art, they think that they're somehow going to be taken to court and say you've given up all your rights. And it's just kind of not the case. There's so much more nuance to
Right.
existence and our relationship to art.
Yeah, that's well said. And I often think too about how personal like writing is for people and you capture your thoughts and your experiences. And I wonder too how much that comes into play for certain creators of, written form, I guess, or like anything that you put your heart into it, how the possessiveness that just is
Oh
inherently there
yes.
as human beings. So just really appreciate
That's a
the
very, I
push.
will say that's a very good point. And I have a lot of empathy for that. That's, I think of all the points you could make on the other side, actually,
Hmm.
that is kind of the best one. I understand it, and out of kindness, I feel for it. That's another thing where everything I'm saying, like maybe if someone doesn't like it out of kindness, I just say, okay, well, I won't make fan fiction if you really don't like it. It doesn't have anything to do with the validity of the art. But to that point, I will also say that despite having empathy for it, I do disagree. I don't personally feel that, in the sense that I'm not going to name names, although it's pretty easy to know. There are certain writers who have said things like, these are my characters, and how do you think it
Hmm.
feels to see them put in these situations, and how traumatizing that is for them. I think fundamentally what I would say to that is they are not your characters.
Hmm.
They are not my characters. Just because I wrote something doesn't mean I know them any better than someone who has read my book. It is just fundamentally not how I see art. And as I said, there are legal things to parse that, where I do think I should be paid for my books, but in the sense of the validity of that and the kind of um cosmic philosophical ownership, I think once that book is out, the creation that you make as a writer is no more important than the creation that the reader makes in their mind when
Hmm.
those words are on the page. Those are both valid, important acts of creation, and it is not your character. It's existence's character. It's the entire human experience's character now. It's not yours anymore.
Yeah, I love that and completely agree with that. There's something so like interactive about reading and to be able to, not lay claim to any kind of character or experience that a person may have while interacting with your characters is important. So I really appreciate hearing you say that.
Yes.
Um, in the term, and I'm so Bury Your Gaze is a very much a love letter to fandom, especially queer fandom. Was there a particular fandom experience in your life that sparked the inspiration to write a novel where fandom plays such a large role?
You know what's interesting? Actually, I didn't really have a big. I think if you ask a lot of, especially young queer buckaroos,
Hmm.
who experienced culture where representation was much sparser than it is now,
Mhm.
there
Hmm.
are almost these kind of like formative moments when they can point to a show or an episode and say that is what did it for me. I'm on the autism spectrum, so just my experience of even emotions is very different from others. Things like
Hmm.
that just do not affect me in that kind of way.
Mhm.
I think that really Bury Your Gaze was about something that we can all relate to, which is and I think you know it if you are queer, that this is a kind of a systematic issue. It
Mhm.
is not something that, there are many examples of it, but there are so many that it just becomes a sort of low hum behind everything in the entire culture. It's something that we know is going to happen when the movie starts based on the way the characters are acting in the first scene. It is
Mhm.
so prevalent, and I think that's really what fascinated me. And what the book is about is like this sort of unspoken thing, not necessarily any one event. I focused it on supernatural for a few reasons,
Mhm.
but really, I think it's a every character in the book is really a reference to some sort of bury your gaze situation. There's a Misha is the lead, and that's clearly a supernatural reference. The show, not the genre
Right.
of books. And there's also Tara from
Mhm.
Buffy, and there's
Mhm.
actually no one gets the Zeke reference, but that is Zeke from Lost, also known as Mr. Friendly,
Oh.
was the one character on that show, and that is, I would say, the closest I get to a real personal bury your gaze situation that
Mhm.
really got to me, because um Zeke was always funny to me because the only queer character on this show with just a massive ensemble show. And Bury Your Gaze, for those who don't know, is kind of specifically about not just killing a queer character, but either killing the one queer character or the one queer character when they come out, and almost punishing them
Mhm.
for their queerness. Sometimes it's a dramatic, they kill themselves to save the others, but it's this particular situation, and it generally means coming out right before you die. And what was so funny about Lost to me is that that character died, and because the show works in flashbacks, you learn like 8 episodes later in his flashback that he was gay. And I always thought it was so funny that they bury the gays and Lost so much that not only does he come out and then die, he dies and then comes out.
He has to die
Oh
first.
no.
That's awful.
It Yes.
Yeah.
Premature burial.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Um, all of that is so fascinating. And yeah, to speak to the specificity of Bury Your Gaze, mine was Quelliot from The Magicians. Which
Oh,
anyone,
yes.
yeah, anyone who listens to this podcast knows extremely well. We don't have to get into the specifics of it. But I really did appreciate that there were so many nods to queer fandom history through the character names and through sort of those situations. Even just this is where we're going to start getting into spoilers for the book. So if you haven't read it, stop now. But the
Stop now and go order it and come back.
truly purchase it.
Seriously.
I
Yes.
pausing to say I adored this book. Just not even to sort of gas you up. I've
Mhm.
had such a good
Oh,
time
thank
reading
you.
it, and I'm not a horror girly. The horror is not
Right.
my genre, so I was a little nervous going into reading it, but I really really loved it, and I think it's because
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
yeah, I think a large part of it is that I felt really seen by it and felt that there was so much in there that sort of like wink wink nudge nudge, if you know you know, that I was in. The story was so good on top of that that like the combination of things just was totally hit a home run for me. um and I really appreciated that not only was the book sort of addressing Bury Your Gaze, but it really was trying to sort of go through um like different stereotypes and tropes throughout the entertainment industry, throughout media, and really talk about sort of the meat of it all, which is, like how much of this conversation is not only about bury your gaze as a trope problematic unto itself, but sort of a larger conversation inspired by things like the writer's strike, the conversation we're having about AI, like how intentional were those conversations and how much of that impacted the way that you wrote the book as well.
Oh, very, very much important. I mean, really what's interesting about the book is that with Bury Your Gaze, it is about that trope, obviously,
Mhm.
but you kind of said it best in the opening. It really is about fandom, and by way of, it's about human creation with an underline of the word human. What it means to process life through art, what it means when you take away the human part of it, what it means when you disrespect part of that loop by saying that fandom and inspiration and influence isn't valid. That it's kind of just about that loop and
Mhm.
saying this loop is important. It's important to have a healthy relationship with every part of it, whether it is the inspiration, or the creation that is made later and that will inspire someone else and spin off in various directions. And then ultimately, lastly, it's about the importance of representation in that loop.
Mhm.
How that loop, basically that it's going to take effort to break into that loop and start representation, and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I was sort of stumbling through was that the book cycles not only from, at the top of the book, representation means you have to kill off your queer characters. That is what is profitable. That is what is acceptable. And there is a moment towards the end where that flips, and it is determined to be profitable to be queer, to be gay. And it becomes a very inauthentic or very stereotypical version of queerness that is palatable. And I thought that particular sort of dissection of that and that continued conversation about, it's not just about not killing your queers, it's also about seeking authenticity, seeking sincerity, and allowing art to be sincere, that
Yes.
really spoke to me through the end
Oh,
of the
thank
novel.
you.
Yeah.
So I have an interest there's an interesting thing about that,
Mm-hmm.
which is that and now we're really getting into spoiler territories,
Yeah.
buckaroos. So
For real.
so this is a huge spoiler. But so I like to write in novels. I write screenplay formatting, not formatting, but pacing.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of why my books feel cinematic, is because I use the beats of a film, not necessarily a novel, because
Mm-hmm.
I am much more into watching films than reading. Actually, it's a bigger influence for me than films. But part of that is I always try to do a first and last image. So my previous book, Camp Damascus, I won't give it away, but first and last image is a huge deal in that book. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually, I try to make it a huge deal in everything that I write, where the theme, you can just see from the opening line to the last line how that theme has carried through the book. And when I was writing Bury Your Gaze, I had this idea that the opening image is kind of intentionally boring. It's him sitting in this line of cars going to work, having an average day as a creator, basically, and showing that uh it's just kind of a cycle. It's a grind for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically what you're supposed to show is your last image of that kind of the new version of that. And the point of the book is kind of, there's a false last image where you think the problem is solved.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next scene is him in that line again, waiting to get into the studio. And that should be the last image, to kind of show thematically, that would show, oh, no matter what happens, nothing changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what I did with the book is, instead of a first and last image, I did a first image and a last image that is actually about 80% of the way through the book. It's like how we enter the finale to say, no, actually, this ending that we've been told, where we say there's going to be no conflict for the queer characters or anything like that, or we have to let all the queer characters survive, is also not the answer. In fact, it's kind of equally bad, because fundamentally, all we want is the ability to have representation and art and create what we want.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. Whether that is tragedy or joy, it should just be allowed to express yourself without these boundaries. So, anyway, that was a very rambling process answer to explain that there is a sort of a false first and last image in it that I'm kind of proud of, and I don't think anyone else will ever notice it, but I do enjoy it.
I appreciate that information and insight, and yeah, it totally resonated that was where that was going. That sort of a false ending almost of
Yes, yes.
landing in okay, if everybody lives, then we're happy, right? And the answer is no. Like I was talking about this with our third unseen member of the podcast team, Caitlin, the inimitable Caitlin, who is also a big fan of yours, and she made the point to me that the end goal is that if a character dies, it's not because they are queer, it's because that's what the story is saying. And that is to say that like there should be more than one queer character. There should be more than one person of color. So it is not about their identity. It is not
Yes.
about them being the only. It becomes this is a story of humanity.
Well, then that is so ingrained in our culture,
Yes.
specifically because of the Hays Code.
Oh,
And
yes.
speaking of names, that there is a character called Jack Hayes
Mm-hmm.
in Barrier Gaze, but the Hays Code really just said, that you can have queer coded characters as long as they are seen as sort of degenerate or villainous,
Mm-hmm.
or their queerness is punished. And
Right.
so even when the Code was removed, you're still finding, creators without knowing it, particularly straight creators who might not have noticed this, are being influenced by all this pre-Hays Code stuff. And it's that loop that I'm talking about, where
Mm-hmm.
even if we make a change, you're still being inspired by things that occurred during it. And so these changes take much longer and many more cycles of the loop to actually permeate culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alan, do you want to take a question?
Yeah, sure. So one of the struggles that Misha has surrounding him is the choice to come out, both in his hometown and amongst his non-LA friends and to the wider public. He wrestles with the idea of coming out publicly as heroic and admirable, but also wanting to maintain boundaries of safety and privacy. And this is something that we've talked a lot with regards to fandom and instances in where folks felt compelled to come out. Kit Connor very recently comes to mind, or who have otherwise struggled with this kind of like feeling the need to come out so that they aren't being called queer baiters. And I'm wondering how much of this struggle reflects your experiences as Chuck Tingle, discussing your personal experiences while also maintaining privacy.
Oh,
Do you
yes.
think that do you
I
think your
well, there's
anonymity has allowed for a greater amount of sincerity?
Yeah, well, there's actually, I think there's kind of 2 points to be made there. The first is just kind of the gatekeeping of queerness. I
Mm-hmm.
think it is a
Mhm.
very unfortunate side effect of good intentions, but honestly, it is one of my least favorite things ever. I've written actually many tinglers because along with these horror stories, I still write my kind of erotica shorts where I process various things. And I have written several about gatekeeping. I have been gatekept myself. I mean, I think most buckaroos have.
Mm-hmm.
And it is ridiculous and it is horrible. I think something to keep in mind is that
Mm.
this idea that there's going to be bad actors sneaking into the queer community for clout or whatever it is, while that may and does happen, there are, probably, I think we're knocking on the door of or passing 8 billion people on the planet. Someone will sneak into a community they don't belong. Whatever damage comes from that is nothing close to the damage that is caused to someone who is told that they don't belong when they are looking for
Mm.
that home. It is so out of proportion and not worth it. It is just
Mm-hmm.
gatekeeping is outrageously wrong in every sense. So that is the first answer.
Mm-hmm.
The second
Mhm.
is that for me personally, this book is probably the most personal thing that I've written because it really is just my story
Mm-hmm.
since becoming
Mm.
popular through creating as Chuck. The fundamental journey of Misha is my journey, which is that when I am not wearing this pink bag over my head, for all the listeners who are probably confused by that, I am anonymous and wear a pink bag, and when I do public appearances, no
Mm-hmm.
one knows who I am. But in my bagless life, As a bisexual buckaroo, I am in a heteronormative relationship, which basically means that you are going to be gate kept a lot. Bisexual gatekeeping is a big thing. And at the same time, there's a lot of things. I guess my autism is similar in that I'm very, if I don't have my bag on the head and I'm going about my life, I'm very neurotypically passing.
Mhm.
So I'm passing in all these ways. And I always thought that I shouldn't talk about my queerness or my neurodivergence because there are others who have a much harder time when these parts of my life have only given me joy. I have only had positive things happen from being queer or being neurodivergent.
Mhm.
And so I thought, I'm just going to leave this space. And I do think there's something to be said there. But what I have realized eventually is that actually we need all kinds of stories. We need the stories for young queer buckaroos. Yes, there are tragic stories, but there are also stories like old Chuck here, where I say, actually, being queer has been amazing. I
Mhm.
love it. It's been joyful. Don't have any trauma about it. It's great. And so basically, Bury Your Gaze was me wrestling with, is that, okay, I have an entire career making queer art without really having to reckon with it in my life,
Mm.
just like kind of Misha doesn't have to reckon with it, um because he's not really out. He doesn't have to be, because in my case, I don't have to be, because no one sees a hetero presenting relationship and just assumes
Mhm.
that they're queer. So it's kind of me wrestling with my feelings with that. And what is interesting is that through Chuck, and through these books, through Tinglers and all this, in my personal life, I have really been able to use that to kind of come out, because anyone that knows that I write as Chuck, it kind of opens that conversation. So essentially, I kind of came out through my art before I ever needed to outside of my art. And I actually did a big live show. I do live shows as Chuck, and I invited some very close buckaroos to me who I had never really I wouldn't have lied about it, but the conversation never came up.
Mhm.
And I said, come to this show. And I essentially came out to a lot of close buckaroos on stage by just saying, come to this Chuck show. And that was kind of the inspiration for a moment in Bury Your Gaze when
Mhm.
Misha comes out very publicly. So really, the entire arc of the character was my arc, actually.
That's really great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Um, I think that really the heart of that really comes through in the novel. And as an asexual person, I would like to second that gatekeeping sucks. It's the worst.
Oh my gosh. That is, I'm sure you know from reading Bury Your Gaze
Mhm.
and how much I love the asexual
Mm.
community and aromantic community. But honestly, there is. I do not want to have any infighting between the letters of our big queer family,
Mhm.
but dang, do asexuals take a lot.
Yeah.
It is
Hmm.
unbelievable the way that asexuals are treated in the queer community, and that was a reason for writing Bury Your Gaze and planning it as it was.
Mhm.
I will say that I started writing asexual tinglers because
Mhm.
Ace Buckaroos said that they wanted to be represented in the Tingleverse, and I said, okay, help me out. And I see it when you go from letter to letter in the queer community. It's like being a you're like cousins. You want to be a good house guest for
Right.
your family dinner.
Yeah.
So I talked to a lot of asexual buckaroos online and said, okay, how can I do this right? And all these things. And there was so much kindness, while at the same time, I was seeing them take so much online, so much hate from other parts of the queer community, that I thought, I'm going to find a way to write a novel where I am basically with my whole dang chest saying, asexuals are unequivocally valid in the queer community. And I don't care what anyone says. That's going to be the big dramatic finale in this book, is going to say, without question, asexuals are valid in the queer community. And heck yeah, asexuals and aromantics. And I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to do it, but I always put that in my back pocket from all the friendly aces that helped me earlier. And when Bury Your
Mhm.
Gaze came around and I had this idea of how the plot was going to weave and who was going to be that kind of character, and I thought, this is that moment. So here we go, asexual buckaroos. I'm going to pay you back for all the kindness. And so that was really a big part of writing this book as well.
Yeah, you can't see my face right now, but I'm like half crying a little bit. But it was the representation that I felt through Tara was so profound, and it really is like it is unheard of to have a like out proud loud ace protagonist in the way that we get Tara. And so that sort of ultimate moment where Tara is so critical and so important, and it's done through like in a funny way too, where it's pointing out the absolute absurdity that, again, spoilers, because this, this AI thing that is, destroying people and killing people is reliant on pre-existing tropes, characters, and ideas. Because there's no ace representation, Tara can like get it. Was so
Yes.
powerful, where it took something.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it took something that is painful, like the pain of not being represented, and turned it into a moment of like triumph and like winning in a way that just it felt really, really great. I had a
Oh,
whole
yes, thank you.
thing here where I was going to talk about, like, you posted on Tumblr about wanting to talk about ace folks too, and I just wrote, there's no question here, it's just cool as hell, so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I
I
stand by it.
it is well, and here's another thing about Tara as a character. As a bisexual buckaroo and that kind of gatekeeping thing, I do feel a kinship, even outside of my experience with asexual buckaroos, because of that. And so for me, as a bi buckaroo, what I wanted to do with the characters of Zeke and Tara, they're kind of the two side characters for listeners. I thought to myself, okay, building these personalities, if there was one thing that I heard from my ace buckaroos is there is almost no representation, but what little representation there is very kind of muted and inhuman. Like they only dress in all grays and like kind of are just barely like interacting with the world in a joyful way. It's this very strange stereotype. And then on the other side, the stereotype of basically every bi character is that they are dressed as a rainbow flag and kick open the door and say, "I'm bi, everyone. Hello." And so I thought it would be very fun to basically take those stereotypes and flip them and swap them around. So I made Zeke this very stoic, few words character that is kind of this like quiet, solid rock. And then I made Tara, the asexual character, because Zeke is the bi character, Tara, the asexual character, basically be like loud, and every room she is kind of the center of attention. And the reason that I wanted to do that, one, because I thought it was fun, but two, I thought the louder I can make Tara with not only her fashion, but just her dialogue and everything, the more apparent this problem will be when the ending comes and the asexual like lack of representation is still unnoticed by the computer. So basically I thought I don't want Tara to just be this average character that doesn't get noticed because of the lack of representation. How much more powerful would it be if she's the loudest character in the whole book and the computer still doesn't recognize her? In fact, there's a little Easter egg about that where in the screenplay sections, which are from another big spoiler, from the perspective of the AI, there's a part when Tara gets touched by Mrs. Y, and I could have put because it's screenplay format, Tara, and then her lines, and instead it's nondescript woman is who's speaking in that line. So that's the little Easter egg for that of no matter what she does in the eyes of this conglomerate, she still just doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's so good and it's so important, and I love Tara so much. Yeah. It was really truly stunning to sort of hit that turn in the book and be like, "Oh, wow."
One of the few characters that I've ever wanted to been really strongly like I just want to write a sequel just so I can trot
Yeah.
with them more. you know.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I also very clearly pictured, I don't often picture like specific people for characters, but I very clearly pictured Erika Ishii as Tara in my head.
Oh, that's a great call.
Yeah, and I pictured like someone with such like verve and such personality, like wearing tons of buckles and all, like the hair, like it was just so cool to have
Oh,
somebody.
very, very interesting. That's a
Yeah.
good, I like that take.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just thought it was really great to have somebody who, again, wasn't that sort of like quiet or inhuman, robotic, whatever. They had like a full life, and it was really awesome. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess actually, speaking of the Tinglers, to sort of loop back a little bit, I think a lot of people do know you as the erotica writer. Although obviously both Camp Damascus and Bury Your Gaze have had very much critical success and acclaim. What was the point where you thought, I want to write a horror book? What got you into that? Was horror something that was big in your personal life and you wanted to write in that?
Yes, I have always loved horror. I call it the Trinity of malign genres, which
Mm-hmm.
are romance, horror, and comedy. The
Mm-hmm.
genres that everyone, no matter how much money they make or anything, the sort of intellectuals or gatekeepers will look down on them and say that's not valid art. That has always actually been where I like to play.
Mm-hmm.
I like exploring those genres, the taboo of that. I like that they are kind of genres of the body. They want to elicit a reaction, whether that is arousal for romance or fear for and a scream from horror or laughter from comedy. There is a sort of a thing where kind of the powers that be throughout history are always generally trying to say that your body is wrong. And I reject that notion.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that, I think, is just seeing the validity in these genres. So switching from erotica to horror was actually pretty dang easy because I feel like they both uh exist in that realm, and I have just always loved horror anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So
Cool. Alan, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
I don't know.
Uh-oh, did we
What
lose
happened to
Alan?
Alan?
Did we
I'm
lose
so
Alan?
sorry. No, no, I muted my microphone separately of the Zoom call, and then it
It didn't.
threw me for a loop.
I'm sure that was a fun moment of panic.
Yeah, it
Alan
sure was.
disappeared.
No more Alan. Alan.
The AI got me.
No.
I know I really appreciate the perspective. Sorry to talk back a little bit about what you were just saying with all of these different genres and like how they play into like how they evoke visceral reactions out of people. And I think that horror for a long time, one of the things that I'm a huge horror person. I love horror. And one of the things that we always talk about is how it's always trying to like push the narrative, or it's trying to introduce ideas or like the social commentary that you can sneak into horror, because a lot of people just see it as this like kind of mindless gore fest, or go in just for fun. And a lot of the great horror movies of the past all have to do with like social commentary. I think of like Night of the Living Dead and how that had the first African American lead, and then only to
Yes.
have him shot at the end by a white cop, and how timely that continues to be, unfortunately. But
Yes, pretty
um,
incredible.
yeah, so just a huge love, and love the different evoking laughter with comedy and lust with with erotica. And so we're talking a lot about your different works. This is a more of a curiosity. So you just signed on for 4 more novels through your publishing agency. And
Yes,
we
just
no
announced.
spoiler.
Just
Without
announced.
getting into any spoilers, is there anything you're particularly excited to write about next? Are you thinking you're going to stay in the same kind of like horror
Oh.
genre? Are you exploring something else?
I write pretty dang fast. I also so it's 4 novels. 3 of them have been announced, just at least the titles.
Mm-hmm.
So and I have already written them actually because I write really fast. So the next one is Lucky Day. It comes out next year, and it is very much specifically about bisexual erasure
Mm.
through and I would say that what's interesting about it is the most symbolic of my horror. It is still queer horror, but
Mm.
normally I would say the queer issues are like very much just a part of the horror. This one I would say the bi erasure is kind of the theme, in the
Mm.
sense that it is essentially, I had this thought. There's this and it is sort of just the thought of like, a lot of folks say bisexuals don't exist. That was kind of a thing for a long time, and I think there's been a lot of progress there. But they say, well, you're not really bi. You're just experimenting on one end. I guess it really, it's very gendered. If a woman says, I'm bi, everyone just says, oh, you're straight. You're just fooling around for attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if a
Mm.
if a man says, oh, I'm bi, they say, well, clearly you're just gay. So it's a very interesting thing. But essentially, this idea that bisexuals don't exist, I kind of thought to myself, okay, what if I made a story about a bisexual facing down non-existence? And it's a sort of thing of saying like, oh, you think that buys don't exist? I will show you what happens when non-existence enters the world. So that is kind
Ah.
of the idea of the book.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye out for that one because that one sounds
Yeah,
baller.
I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
You
It does sort of
you
make
never
me,
miss.
yeah, never miss. It
Not
does,
yet.
not yet. It does make me wonder about one sort of more thing that does have to do with Bury Your Gaze, but really has to do with your work in general, which is sort of the balance of when to lean into certain tropes for the use of them versus when is the appropriate time to break the trope or to subvert the stereotype. I think about that a lot. Like another very specific spoilery moment. I was really concerned when I was reading the book that the real life trauma behind the smoker was going to be sexual violence in some way. And it felt like that was very naturally leading there. And then it was subverted and it wasn't quite that. It was something a little bit different. And I think there was
Yes.
I think it was like an important moment that it wasn't, because so often queerness is sort of denigrated by others as like, well, obviously something happened to you when you were young to cause it, and that we know that's not true. So I think it was so important to subvert that moment and not have it go that way. So I'm interested in hearing more about, even with this new book or just in general with your writing, your process of playing with tropes and playing with them and sort of picking the moments to subvert them.
Oh, thank you. That moment, I appreciate you saying that because that was very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say too much more because you've already said it. That was kind of the intent there was, I think it's kind of it's like the type of thing where, and let's go outside. We're talking about actor representation a lot, or these things, or character representation. But I think as a writer, it's kind of, this is an example of why it's important to also support kind of people telling their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
A queer writer writing queer stories. Is that I feel like a straight author would fumble a moment like that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's these subtle things where if unless you're within the culture, you don't realize how much they're stereotypes. And that's not to say that that doesn't happen. Obviously, that's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly not to deny the trauma of anyone who's experienced that, because it is, it's not a hot take to say that that's not good.
Right.
But I just thought that is so obvious in
Mm-hmm.
culture, in every piece of culture that we have ever had, that that's where this would go.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really in another version of that is kind of equally common or realistic or whatever, where it's a sort of like, I'm gonna do this out of at least an excuse for care of you, because your life is going to be so hard, you need to toughen up right now.
Mm-hmm.
That is another version of that I think it's talked about much less, and so I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was kind of more interesting to explore. um and then to answer your more direct question of like, when is the time to pull back? I think I can feel it just as someone who experiences art, I have a pretty good radar for when something happens where I feel like, oh, that's not right. There was actually one in Bury Your Gaze. There was a issue where one of the female characters who had a little bit of a bigger role die. There was a well, here we go. Let's go deep. As long as
Yeah,
I'm not rambling too much.
let's do it.
There,
We're here for
there
it.
was the only change that was kind of really edited is there was a chapter towards the end where there's a character named Blossom who only appears in the beginning, and they talk about how she's threatened at the end when Misha goes to the studio. Blossom is trying to make a documentary about queer trauma, and they say, well, we're not going to have any more queer trauma, and she fell down the stairs and it's going to get worse. So there's like a threat to her in this version that I like, because originally there was a version where there's a chapter that I cut where she is killed,
Oh,
and
wow.
that kind of drives Misha to make that choice. And the chapter is actually, as far as horror goes, very fun. It involved one of my favorite monsters that basically just has a cameo now, which is the bride.
Oh,
And so
Mm.
she's killed by the bride, and I did like the chapter, but it always bothered me because there's this other trope called fridging. Do you and that is basically when a female character is murdered, mostly off screen, basically to drive the change and the big finale or the moral shift in the male hero. And
Mhm.
basically I couldn't, even though that chapter really worked to motivate Misha, I was like, it never sat right with me. And ultimately in the final version, it was exactly what you talked about, which is, if I'm going to write this book about tropes, I'll be darned if I'm going to fall right into this equally bad trope.
yeah.
So I found a way to kind of make that happen without that chapter, and that's why I cut it.
I think that makes total sense. I couldn't even conceive of how different that moment would have been now that you say it that way, where,
Mhm.
because I love Blossom. Blossom was so great.
I think I want to bring her back. Well, yes, yes. I think I want to bring her back because she was fun to write. And yeah, it still worked in the sense that basically that chapter happens like after he goes to the studio,
Mhm.
because and my editor even said, my editor Kelly, she's wonderful. She said, because I talked about it and I was like, I don't know, I feel weird about this part. I don't know. Should I cut it? I probably should cut it. And she said, the reason I was worried is I said, is it enough motivation for them to stop the computer if just everything is queer joy now? And actually my editor said, actually, yeah, it's enough. If you just have the studio chapter, and maybe think of some other way to just mention Blossom, that threat, without actually killing her, I think it's enough. And that's where it is now. I think it works better.
I love it. And I do think there's actually something about the insidiousness of the threat rather than the action that is scarier than
I agree.
outright
Yeah,
doing it.
it's very, and especially it gives me an opportunity to make this character just kind of, it's like one sentence now, and you're right. It works. It's much more creepy if it's just a kind of throwaway sentence instead of a whole chapter.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Alan, do you have any other questions?
I don't think so. I think
I
we've gotten to the end of what I have.
Yeah, I mean, I have one more question, and it's a little schmaltzy, and that's okay. But
I
I,
love
I
that.
love
think
schmaltz.
me too. I think one of the things I'm trying really hard to sort of like keep my cool, but like I think one of the things that I admire about you and I think is so wonderful about having you on here is that both of us, your work, our podcast is really sincere and like
Mhm.
is out to sort of do the thing that it set out to do for the love of it, and it's very clear that the love comes through. um
Oh yes,
Love is real. And
yes.
so I think the question that maybe we should end on, and we can just sort of schmaltz all over it, is what is the value of being sincere? What joy does that bring into the world for you?
Mhm.
I will say, because sincerity is a huge part of my art and just the way that I exist, I think you could say part of that is kind of the autistic kind of perspective of my mind, which is that I don't get a lot of jokes. I don't or rather I get them, but I just don't like that. Like I don't like making fun of certain things. I really, a lot of what I do is sincere and it just ends up funny. And I recognize that I can make buckaroos laugh just by being sincere because my sensibilities are very odd. So sincerity has always been a very big, important part of my life. I never understood, why are you covering up your feelings with this other thing? We're only on this dang planet once. Let's love what we love. And so I never understood it. And I think that, now that I am, have this huge voice through these books and everything, I think that's going to come through more and more. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's part of my brain. I will hear authors, and this is totally fine. I am not talking down to them because I have many horror author friends, and it's kind of a thing when you're writing horror. They're always talking about things like, "Oh, it's so messed up. I love how traumatized the readers are going to be here," because that's kind of how the genre works, and that's okay. That's a valid kind of art experience too. And I just have never gotten that feeling. I don't want to do that with the things I create. So, it's just not a part of who I am to be insincere. And I just happen to have this presentation that many would assume is ironic or fake or a bit or a character. And so I guess I just end up having this conversation a lot because it's sincerity ends up being a big part of my life.
I think as I get older, I find myself less and less interested in being too cool to be sincere. I think
Yes.
there was,
Right.
it's like, to your point, I mean, life is short. We have precious little time on this earth together, and why not be sincere and love the things that you love with your whole chest.
Yes, prove love. That's all. What else are we here for?
Truly. And that's actually what brought me and Alan together for this podcast, was being brave enough to be like, oh, I like this thing that I think I'm supposed to be ashamed of, but you like it too.
Yes.
Why are we ashamed of it? We shouldn't be.
Yes.
And now we're here talking to you, Chuck Tingle. And this is
Hello,
a really
yes.
great day. So I am very, very grateful for the role sincerity has played in all of our lives.
Yeah, and there's something to be said too about like you don't really know the weight of like being insincere or of trying to put up a front or of trying to live your life in a way that you think others want. And then the moment you kind of stop caring about that and lean into sincerity and authenticity, you find that you have so much more space to like appreciate things and to like live the kind of life that you want. And so I think that it's really interesting that like sincerity just sounds like such a simple ideal to hold on to, but it really like unlocks a whole world.
Yes, very good point. Lugging around all that irony is much heavier than buckaroos realize.
Mhm.
Definitely. Well, Chuck, this has been an absolute joy. I will treasure this conversation for the rest of my days, and I mean that in 100% sincerity. This was so wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And
This was delightful. Yeah.
everyone listening should go right now and go buy Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle from your local bookstore or in ebook form or however best suits you, because it is an incredible book that is well worth the read.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. As always, friends, you can find the Fic List all over the internet, anywhere your podcasts are held. But check out theficlist.com. You can find us on TikTok. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us at theficlistpodcast.tumblr.com. Thank you, Caitlin. And until next time, have a good one.
Yep.
Bye.